Hello. All right. So can I ask, sorry? Yeah. Lena, do you want to come over and we'll get started? Marcella? Lara? Lara, you want to come over? All right. Well, thanks a lot for, in the sea of all the events that are going on, I'm told 900 of them this in the next 2 weeks on food. This probably is going to be the best one because one, we have a all women panel, which is perfect. Second, it's about pulses, which is close to my heart personally. Also, I live in Canada. Pulses are big in Canada as well. And three, it's school meals, and I got two kids, 9 and 11, and they love pulses and beans, but they don't get it in their school meal program. And Canada just launched a national school meal program with more than $700 million of budget assigned to it. So I'm quite interested to now get into this panel. For those who don't know me, my name is Sid Mehta. I'm the founder of Greenworks. I've spent more than 20 years in food services, looking after food in many different operations, including schools, colleges, hospitals, prisons, cruise ships, Golden Globes, Oscars, all of it. But I grew up on a farm, smallholder farmer. So I'm also keen to hear about that voice. So for today, what I'll do is I'll get each of our speakers to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got involved in what you do today, your role with the organization, and then we'll get into the conversation. So over to you. And I also am, as the moderator, I get to keep my mic. But if you can pass along the mics, keep it close to your mouth. We're going to have it recorded, and so hopefully we can replay it in many other places also. So over to you, Laura. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us here, and thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on a panel with all of you. My name is Lara Gilmore. I'm the Director of Policy and Sustainability at the Global Pulse Confederation. So I'm from Scotland. We don't have a tradition of eating beans, lentils, or chickpeas, but we will soon. But I'm based in Portugal, and there we eat a lot of chickpeas and beans, so kind of similar to Brazil. So just a little bit about what the Global Pulse Confederation, or GPC, does. We are the trade association for the global pulses industry. We represent the entire value chain from farm to fork. It is our mission to increase production and consumption of pulses worldwide, not only as a way to enhance the trade, but also to position these crops as a solution for the crisis facing our climate currently, and the other issues that are facing our food systems, nutrition insecurity, food insecurity. We kind of see pulses as this superhero that can really bring in co-benefits across the entire food system. And we're here at COP basically to spread that message, to talk about where pulses can have a role. School meals is a huge priority for us. Consumption in general, whether that be institutional demand or on an individual level, and production as a way for farmers to have a crop that brings regenerative agricultural benefits into their soils. So that's a little bit about us.
Thanks,
I'll pass
Laura.
on.
Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Liana Latorre. I'm from the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm from Colombia. So beans are actually really into our daily menu. And I'm the vice president for the regional office that we just opened 7 months ago. That is going to be based in Bogota for all the region, covering Latin America and the Caribbean. There are better now. Okay. Do you hear me or do I have to go again? Okay. So the regional office is based in Colombia, and our core programs, three of them, but the three of them are people-centered solutions and people-based solutions. One is energy, the second one is health related to heat, and the third one is food for good. And we did that, our big bet has been in the last months, a big bet of school meals. And that's the reason why I'm here, and I'm happy to share what we have been doing globally in Rockefeller, but also for the region.
Great. We have two Colombians on the panel. This is going to be, we have to exchange recipes at the end of this now.
Yeah. So I'm Marcela Quintero. I'm the research director for the Alliance of Biodiversity International and SIA, that are two international research organizations that came together 5 years ago. But with a long trajectory, more than 50 years of history of doing research for development. And we have one of our main mandates that we have is to conserve agrobiodiversity, but also not just to conserve it just for the sake of conserve it for the future, but also to explore and use that agrobiodiversity. And when I'm saying to use, we are exploring different pathways. So how we can improve when needed that agrobiodiversity, so it offers the needs that people have in terms of productivity, nutrition, environment. Also, how you use that agrobiodiversity in the farms and in the landscapes to diversify livelihoods. And the third one, that is the link to our conversation today, is how we secure that the benefits of that agrobiodiversity reach the plates of people. And school meals is one of the main levers for that, and that's why we are here. We have a big mandate when we created the alliance, that was to connect conservation production to consumption. So that's why for us, school meals is really a centerpiece in that strategy. So thank you for having me here, and yeah, very good to have here with Liana. And also, I'm getting to know more about the Confederation of Pulses, and I see there are plenty of opportunities also to work more together on Pulses. Yeah. And
Already,
by the way, I'm going to talk later more why I'm here on Pulses, because we also hold the largest collection of bins. And then we have a big partnership in Africa, and I'm going to talk more about that later, that is also helping us to take that diversity of beans into use. So I'm going to talk later more about that.
well, I'm going to have you hold on to the mic. So, as you can see from the introductions, we have science, we have on the ground, mobilization of resources, and then we have private sector and representation of private sector, and largely also consumer. So we kind of have the three different things that you would probably need to make this all works. But we're going to start with science, right? Because everything has to be science led, and so from a science perspective, pulses, legumes, beans, chickpeas, they play a critical role. And I know you're going to speak a little bit about some of your programs, but give us a sense of science, why this is important from a regeneration perspective, from a livelihood perspective, and then from a diet perspective. So connect the consumption and the conservation perspective. If you can kick us off, thanks.
Okay, let's kick off. So as I said, we do science, but we don't do science for science. It's science for development. So we, as an agricultural research center, that also have the mandate to safeguard the diversity of some crops that are important for the nutrition of people, like beans, then have an important responsibility as well. And is, first of all, to explore that agrobiodiversity. So for example, in the largest collection of beans that we have in our campus, in our seed bank, to explore what traits those accessions have that could be good to increase nutrition, to increase environmental outcomes, and then productivity. So once we discovered that, and for that we have the seed bank, but also we have field trials, then we see where we see the potential, and we connect it to our genetic improvement program. And there, something that we have to do, because we work for small farmers mainly, is to understand what are the needs of the farmers. And in the case of beans, there was something that emerged as a demand, and is how we can produce beans that have higher nutritional value. So this is how come some years ago we produced biofortified beans that has more iron. And then that was one of the main breakthrough products. But again, how we put that in the plates of people. And also the legumes have other benefits for farming systems. So how we include beans also in farming systems, so they can also improve the soil, they improve the diversification of their livelihood, etc. So then to get there, do we start researching on how we can, what could be the leverage in the system that can help us to put those beans in the plates and in the farming systems. So that's why we came into partnerships and we created the PABRA network that is in Africa. And through PABRA is that we found the market channels to deliver those beans. And also we align or we partnered with local governments also to, for example, in Malawi and Kenya, to incorporate high iron beans in the school meals of their national public schools. And then also through PABRA is that we found also partners to multiply the seed, because we delivered better beans, but we are not a seed company. So we also partner with seed companies that help us to multiply those high iron beans. So this is an example on how we do science, but we connected to development partners to be able to put the science into the hands of those that need the most.
And those who may not know, PABRA stands for
It's the Pan-African Network of Beans, basically.
beans.
Yeah.
Awesome, perfect. It's a great example, and I'm going to take that example and go to Lena in terms of your example. You've just announced a really big investment in Brazil with a range of partners to drive school meals. Hopefully, there are beans in those school meals also. But can you give us a sense of what Rockefeller is doing in Brazil with today's announcement, but in general in the region where you are heading with this?
Sure. I just wanted to connect what Marcela was saying, because science has been always part of the DNA of Rockefeller, science and technology and data, and it's at the core of any of the programs that we do. So in this case, for example, CIAT, which is part of the alliance of the Cigar Alliance, was supported by Rockefeller 70 years ago when it was founded. It actually was the first place that I visited when I came on board to Rockefeller. I went to CIAT just to understand the legacy and the history we have in food systems and in food for good. So this is like a great example of the things that we have been doing in this region for over 70, 80 years: Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, the Caribbean. To your question, yes, with like basic but great examples. There are two examples. One is we see school meals as an enter point for food transformations. It's a vehicle of trying to help that transformation with four different layers. One is nutrition, that Marcela just mentioned. Second one is local sourcing. In countries like Brazil, where you have the 30% local sourcing that is mandatory, that is increasing to 45 starting next year. That's a great example of how can we push and mobilize more resources, having that government mandate. Regen agriculture is an important part for us right now, and working with small and medium farmers. And the last one is how can we strengthen the supply chains. So having those 4 points or those 4 layers as our entry point to the what we call food for good and school meals, we did two big announcements, one globally and one for Brazil 2 days ago. The global one was at the beginning of this year, was $100 million for 100 million children in around 12 countries in the next 5 years, just focus on school meals. And the second one that we announced 2 days ago here is a 5.4 million investment, we call it, for Brazil, working with 12 organizations throughout the country in 4 different states that are working on school meals locally with the communities, and making sure that the nutrition, the local sourcing, the strengthening, and the supply chain are put in place. So we have been doing school meals for many years in Brazil. It is one of the benchmarks in the world. Brazil is one of those. And we're just following that experience that the team, that Rockefeller, the food team has, making sure that we can impact more people, you know, and it's a great example because going back to our data DNA, when you see the numbers, for example, there's the School Meals Coalition that started with 56 countries and now it has 108 countries on board. That's great. Then you have the global investments on food school meals that in 4 years raised from 45 billion to 84 billion. More than 90% of that is like national budgets. but we're seeing that is becoming more important, and it's becoming not only what the meal it is that is feeding the children, which is of course very important, but also the transformation that that can brings to the food systems.
Especially the local infrastructure that is surrounding the school within the state. The local procurement is
Exactly, the
such an
local sourcing,
local and
yes.
indigenous sourcing is such a great multiplier of your investment when you integrate it into school meals. Talking about multiplication, then Lara, from your perspective and your members, you cover all pulse, the whole entire pulse sector across the globe. What are you hearing from your members when it comes to school meals? Where are the entry points? Where are some of the solutions that you can bring as a sector, as a industry sector, whether it's market creation, whether it's capacity? Give us a sense of what you're hearing and where you're going.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your amazing explanations kicking us off. I think from a private sector perspective, the our members in the trade, they want to see kind of a rising tide lifts all boats, right? And they want to see general demand creation. And I think definitely in the private sector, there is an awareness that you start demand creation in schools. You start with children, you build healthy eating habits, and that will create demand. I think Brazil is the greatest example of that. It's in Colombia as well, I'm sure. Also in Kenya, where you're doing similar school meal programs that are centered around beans. There's that cultural heritage that needs to be kept alive, especially as we see kind of modernizing communities move away from their traditional eating habits. And so that demand creation, definitely in the trade, we see it as vital. But I think as well, the other side of it is kind of using the trade as an alternative kind of source of offtake. So if we're trying to, the great thing about integrating pulses into school meals is that not only are you providing nutrition for the children themselves, you're kind of giving farmers a super easy incentive to grow a crop that is going to help with their with their with their soils. And that's basically saying, like, we have an incentive, we will procure. The private sector can come in as well and kind of play almost like a backstop for that, to provide additional insurance, because there is a global market for pulses. There always will be. We're hoping that we're going to see it grow. And so I think as we look at established markets that are already including regenerative crops, indigenous communities, and beans in their school meals, such as Brazil, such as Kenya, such as, I think you mentioned Colombia. But then we look at Canada. Canada does not have a tradition of eating school of pulses. So how do we bring that into this new school meal program? And I think the trade has an important role to play there, because we can provide the incentives, especially if we look at Europe. Again, Europe doesn't have the production. So can Canada come in and bring in that supply while European farmers transition to more pulse-based farming systems? And so I think we talk a lot about trade as the tool for adaptation when it comes to climate. And international trade is the oldest business in history, I think. And I really want us to look at how we can leverage this crop, which is grown all over the world, and to bring it into the places where, bring the trade into the places where it can kind of fill that gap, basically.
Yeah, I think creating a market, especially to support farmers with offtakes, to make sure that they end up in retail or end up in kitchens, is a very important part. But I'm going to shift a little bit as we've now set the stage. Another important part is also around chefs and training chefs and the on the ground skills that are needed to make sure that the pulses that go into these school meals or any other meals are delicious. And there's often this, when the rubber hits the road, so to say, what how are you folks working as a sector when it comes to creating that demand, creating that skills, engaging with the consumers? Give us a sense of what's going on from that perspective, because that's important. You can put it in a policy saying, yeah, more pulses in school meals, but if no one can cook it and if it's not delicious, no one is going to eat it. So
Yeah, two things come to mind. The first is around how we communicate with consumers around changing diets, right? And it's pretty much proven that most consumers don't respond to sustainability that doesn't make them want to eat something. They respond to delicious. And chefs have a unique role to play in leveraging. I was reading something about the other day that saying, they have this creaminess, this depth, pulses that they can add to a dish that chefs are excited about, and they're the right people to leverage that to bring a meal that a child is going to love and is going to want to come back to. There's also a lot of work being done around, people are more inclined to try new things if they're doing it in a community. If they're with a group, they can say, oh, my friend is trying it, so I'm going to try it too, and that will work with children. And then I think about, I don't know if this is a international reference, but Jamie Oliver, right? Way back when he was trying to get ultra processed foods out of the school kitchens in the UK. It was a huge campaign in the early 2000s, and how he brought in these healthy meals for kids, and in the first couple of months they were just throwing them in the bin. He was looking at the trash, and it was full of the meals the children weren't eating. How he got them involved was he brought them into the kitchens, the children, and he said, look at how this turkey Twizzler, as it was called, is made. And that's disgusting. I don't want to eat that. Do you want to eat that? And then he brought them into the gardens. He brought them into the growing process and the preparation process, and said, you know, don't you want to eat this now that you've seen how it's been made? And it worked. And so I think that that's the kind of dual role that our educators, our nutritionists, and our chefs can play. But I'm sure you have insights as well, the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I think the skill piece and the knowledge and engagement piece will play a critical role. Liana, you've gone through this current investment cycle. You've spoken to these organizations where there is institutions involved and changing institutional behavior change to really make sure that they hit the 4 pillars that you are working on. What are you seeing from institutional behavior that you are investing in that is allowing for the integration of regenerative crops, nutritious meals? What are some of those levers that you are seeing, that you are investing in, that are going to deliver some of those shift in school meals? Especially if you think about beans, if we post this question saying, hey, we need to put more beans on the menu, how are you seeing some of those shifts in institutions?
Institutions, I will say, is aligned to what we're thinking, that is a change in the mindset. That is part of the goals for our school meals program. One is nutrition, the other one is the meals per se, the third one is the mindsets. So in the mindsets, not only the local institutions but the different stakeholders is to think about the school meals not only as something that is related to, for example, the Ministry of Health, or in some cases education. It has to be with the Ministry of Finance. It's also related with the economics of a country. Is related to is more than that. So the first one is the mindset at the stakeholder level. The second one is there's an instrument that we're starting to test, that is the school gardens. And just that, because before tasting something, I think you have to respect and to love what is growing in the soil. So that's kind of the work that we are starting to do, and it's like that's where you put the kids, but also the families that work sometimes at those schools, at the kitchens. But once you respect that, I think you start to like it before tasting,
Agreed.
And there's an issue like making sure that it's delicious and it's good. But once you respect that, and if it's a bean, if it's a pastry, much more. So we're working on that, on some projects that have the educational component through school gardens for the children. And I think that's the best push, because you're thinking, as we always do, in solving a problem. The emergency is the feeding, the problem is the nutrition, and is the good food. So by doing that, we're thinking in the long term, and how can next generations, probably not this ones, but next generations, enjoy more and respect more the food that is available, if it's beans in our region, respect that and like that and eat that.
Yeah, it's very true. I have two. I can do all of these experiments in my house because I have a 9 and an 11-year-old. So my 9-year-old has a community garden in the school, and she brings kale every once in a while. She'll bring because they've harvested it, and then I make a kale salad for her, and then she realizes that it's so little, and they work so hard, and they all of a sudden she realizes, oh my god, the grocery store, when we go and buy a big bunch of kale, actually there's so much of hard work in it, and the nutrition that comes out of it, and all those stories that follow, they become part of family talk. And because the kids come home with all of this harvest from the community garden. So
I just to tap on that, because I also have a kid, and if you put a bean and the bean grew in it depends on which bean. I'm not the expert in the beans, but I just remember there was a storm. We had a garden and has a storm and was gone. And he asked me what happened. Say it's gone. Say, and then next month he got it and said, like, you remember that bean, that seed that was there, you can eat it. It's like, oh mom, it's a lot of effort,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of respect
Yes.
of for the nature, and I will say for the traditions also. For our region, beans have been, we grew up with beans, but we have to put more of those on the school meals, understanding the nutrition components on those.
We'll sign up to more beans on school meals for sure. We spoke a little bit about community. It came together a little bit. I want to talk to Marcella about community. You work a lot with indigenous communities. I heard once you said that indigenous seeds and seeds from those regions tend to have different resilience, and then you're working with those communities to make sure that they get the right seed and such. So can you give us a sense of how you're working with communities when it comes to bringing those beans, the right variety of beans, but ensuring that those indigenous communities are very well involved in some of this, the local communities?
Yeah. No, thank you for this question, because I mean, our goal is not that everyone eats beans in the world. Our goal is that people have better nutrition, that is agriculture is more sustainable, and at the end that also we develop more prosperity in the rural areas. So diversity, I think, is key, right? It's in the center for climate resilience, is in the center for nutrition, is in the center for developing more sustainable livelihoods. So of course, beans is of course one crop that generates many benefits, but we know that just planting beans, we are not going to produce contribute to this mission. So since we recognize that diversity is at the core also of our levers of change, let's say, so we also have some complementary strategies. So we are working on also on understanding what is the value of local agrobiodiversity, and how, if we work with beans, we can also design or help to co-design systems that are diversifying. So it's beans with something else, with banana, etc., and understand what local diversity are in those contexts, and also how seed of those local local crops can be available. So we work on community seed banks as well. So in those community seed banks, they can have also access to that local crops that they can use, especially in moments of chokes. Because, I mean, not in those moments, beans are not going to be the only lifesaver there. So we have a very good example in Ethiopia. We just finalized an impact assessment. And we saw the data that this is showing is that, for example, community seed banks were super important when there was conflict in Ethiopia in some areas, that people cannot go to the market, and they have accessible seeds there to cope with those shocks. So that's why we say beans is, of course, one part, but we have to have these complementary strategies. And then apart from that, I want to go back to your question that you made on how you make also, going back to pulses and beans, etc., to make them attractive to the consumers. And then in the case of beans, and you were mentioning about the cooking time of the beans that we produce, is that if we want to put beans in the school meals, there is a logistical problem, right? How it takes to cook, how time it takes to cook the beans, right? And then there are sometimes simple solutions, but if you don't understand what is the need of the user, it's like you don't see it, right? And it was as easy as to put on the market pre-cooked beans that are high in iron content. So with this, then they become more accessible for the school meals programs. I mean, because logistically speaking, it's easier. And also we were saving or we were reducing the use of firewood, that we know is also a limiting factor in many areas on Africa. So those are the things that we also need to start thinking, as you say, in the market, the people that are going to buy it, what they are looking for. And there are some simple solutions like putting accessible these pre-cooked beans to then be able to put it on the plate of school meals.
Yeah, I think the versatility of getting beans from an operational perspective, whether it's pre-cooked, whether it's in a can, whether it can be sitting, because you can have canned beans that can be also have long shelf lives, is really ways in which you can bring. But another innovation that is most likely is happening, and we are seeing more and more, is what has happened with oats, which is all the bars and all the different nut bars. I'm sure there is going to be someone who's going to come up with all kinds of beans and pulses bar because of its high fiber content and protein content. Now that we've had a chance to go through a couple of rounds, before I kind of hand over some questions out here. So get thinking about questions. I want to talk about collaboration and partnerships. All three of you are in the space of that, and we are here gathered to talk about how can we bring beans and pulses and legumes and chickpeas into school meals. You all have examples of great partnerships. The one thing is clear is it needs to be context specific, more and more local and regional. And I'll start with Marcella, as you have we're doing this little mic thing. Um, what are the ingredients when you think about collaboration? If we were to think about scaling beans and pulses into more regions, more school meals, I think the School Coalition has 100 plus countries now, more than 90 billion invested. Where does it start? Where does collaboration start?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand, I mean, what it takes to take a product to the consumer, right? And then as I gave the example of Power, what we did with Power was to create a network that have all the stakeholders of the value chain there. Because we, again, as I said, we need someone who needs to multiple organizations that can multiply the seeds. We need those that can put it in the market, and then we need the liaison with the school meals or whatever is your strategy. So I think to me that's clear, right? Is and that gives you your roadmap, right? At the end of the day. But also I want to bring an example here in Brazil, and it's related with pools, but in general in the use of more diversity in the plates of people. So here a good example was an initiative that we started working together with Brazil, that where we put together scientists, policymakers, and investors. So with scientists, our scientists and scientists of the universities here in Brazil, we were exploring the nutritional composition of different local crops. And then one of the other partners was the ministry here in Brazil, the MAPA. So when we showed information and also where they can access those local crops that can also be incorporated into the school meals, they created a ordenanza, a policy ordinance that basically is saying that all school meal programs in Brazil need to use also native species. So it was just by linking that scientific evidence on the nutritional value and where to source, from where to source those local crops, that the ministry and the government was convinced of putting this now in the regulations that of school meals programs. And now we are in the process of keep advancing the conversation. Now it's in the policy. So now we need to link it to the third part, that is the investment. So you have now the regulatory framework, then the policy enabling environment, you have the knowledge, but now how we make sure that school meals, but also through other mechanisms, you can incorporate that nutritional value of different crops into the plates.
It's
So that for us is, I mean, and when you work in Brazil, you are talking about millions of children that have access to public school meals programs. So it's understanding what are your pathway to really deliver that impact at scale.
you're making my job easier because you're giving me the right cues. You spoke about investments. You've done all of this work with policymakers, with scientists. You've given them the data. The policy is ready. Now investments need to be made. You have the next two speakers are represent.
I did it on purpose.
You represent. That's why I said you're making my job a bit easier. Is so from Lena, from your perspective, then as you look at collaboration, obviously you're so vested in this space, but also your scale is big, right? It's not just Latin America. The investments for regenerative school meals is in 12 countries, as you've shared with us. And so where are you making the investments, and where you're saying, okay, from this point on, it's not our investment, private sector has to take on, or national governments have to take on. Where are you saying this is our lane, we're going to invest, and we'll bring it to this point, and then we'll have it's at the right place where you've de-risked the program, you've given it energy. Now it's private sector and markets and governments to come in. How are you seeing that? I don't know if that question
No,
is
perfect. I'm thinking
yes,
while you're
please.
speaking, but I'm gonna tie that to the question that you made to Marcela
Okay.
because
Collaboration.
yes, because it's part of the answer, the collaboration. So examples, I just share with all of you two examples, the global one and the local one that is Brazil, with these 12 organizations that are in different regions, with
Yes.
different climate conditions, with different traditions, and with different structures in their organizations. So I think that's why
Yeah.
on purpose we're doing that. But to your question, when are we like exiting a project, or there's one mandate that we have at Rockefeller, and I'll keep repeating that, and is we're not here to solve emergencies. We want to solve a problem. And and that's what we have been doing for 113 years now. And to answer that, I will go back to basic language, and is I see 5 things to make that happen, and that is like the criteria that we are using for those more impact investing initiatives. One is to listen, to come to the territories, to the communities, and listen. That's number one. Number second is to respect the local knowledge. We have been doing that, but we have to do that more even these days, and how we respect that local knowledge and learn from the local communities in any of the projects. The third one is that we have to collaborate instead of coordinating, and that's very different. We're used, and I have to say that probably in Latin America, in our region, we're coordinating a lot of things because of the emergency. So you're doing what you can, you're doing what you can. Everyone is putting and that's great, you know. But that's not collaboration. Collaboration is one step back, structuring how you're going to solve that problem. That's the way we're thinking in the initiatives that we're doing. That one gives an outcome that I love, and is how can you better use the resources and the capital that is available. And that's not more capital, is that how can that capital that is in the ecosystem or in a project can be better used. That's the fourth one. And the last one that I think is something that we definitely wanted to do with this announcement for Brazil is the cross-country learning. Having Brazil in this region, and I'm just speak with my hat of the vice president for the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we need to make sure that these initiatives, how can we replicate, respecting the local, respecting the traditions, how can we replicate this model in other countries of the region? And that just because always on purpose, what we always are thinking is solving a problem, and that's a long-term commitment. So if it's a project that we are for 1 year, and if we're out, the project is not working, we're not going to be in that project because that's an emergency. That's not a problem.
It's a great 5 pillars, and very well articulated, because it's very pragmatic, it's very thoughtful, but it kind of is like, I'm an engineer, so I kind of think like an engineer in many ways. So this is very structured. So thank you. From Lara, from your perspective, you have trade associations and members and growers and traders in all of these countries, right? You have a Brazilian association, you have a Colombian association. How do you see mobilizing those resources to support some of this work? Where do you see collaboration from your perspective, whether it's on the research side, whether it's on localization, value chains, markets? There's so many roles that your organization and members can play. Where are you seeing that come through?
Yeah, I think I'd also like to build on what my panelists had said. I was in a panel this morning about shifting plant-based diets kind of in a diplomatic way, shifting towards or sustainable diets. And one of the speakers was from Rede Sustentabilidade from Sao Paulo, from the ministry. And she talked about 3 things: regulation, innovation, and public procurement. And I've been thinking about them all day because we're in a public procurement conversation. And I just want to add in research and investment. And I think I just want to kind of give an example. I think that's the best way that I can organize my thoughts on something that we as an organization have been involved in. So just on your point on national associations and kind of how they drive demand and bring in the private sector, we always look as the apex body for the global industry. We are looking at collaboration where collaboration makes sense, competition where competition makes sense. So that's kind of our mantra there. For us, if Canada wants to say our pulses are the most sustainable, that's fine. If Colombia wants to say our beans are the most sustainable, that's fine with us, because the message that we want is all pulses are sustainable. And so the example that I want to share is we were recently contacted by the Good Food Institute in India to work on a project that they have been given by the GF7, so the Global Environment Facility 7. And the project was all about bringing funding and bringing expertise to help Indian farmers who are not traditional pulse producers, they're more in the rice and wheat systems, which are obviously massive crops in India. The project was basically how to help them make their systems more sustainable. And they started with the research, and of course, India has so much research on pulses and how they can render agricultural systems more sustainable. And so they thought, if we can bring in pulses to these systems as a rotational crop, which they are amazing in, just I could give you so many stats about how they can up sustainability just as an intercrop or a rotational crop. So that was the goal. But of course, we're talking about smallholder farmers, and they don't necessarily have market linkages. They're very reliant on government procurement. And so GFI are really far down the value chain. They're on the innovation side. So they're looking at, how can we get Indian consumers to be excited about pulse products that are not the traditional ones that they grew up eating, not just your traditional dal, your rajma, as we were talking about. What if it was like a protein bar or a chickpea milk? So these are the two kind of areas that we're in. We're in quite a large dichotomy here. And so they brought us in to ask, can the private sector provide an offtake guarantee? And we asked around, and our companies who are active in India, especially the international ones, and they said, hell yeah, we can. We are always looking to procure more. And if we can work directly with the farmers, that was what the GF7 was offering to these private sector players, you get to kind of circumvent the traditional system, and you can work directly with farmer producer organizations. You'll have a local champion on the ground who is coordinating with the farmers, who's making sure they have the knowledge, the seeds, the know-how, all the technical advice that they might need that FAO was providing on the ground. Private sector will buy this, and then we actually managed to kind of close the final gap by bringing in a private sector player who was basically saying, yes, we want to give more to school meals, that's a given. We want to bring, India already has pulses in their school meals, it's a massive part of their diet, but what if we can add in another element? What if we can develop some protein bars out of pulses that they can have as a snack that can, again, just change the kids, get them excited about a new thing, and kind of, I guess, bring that excitement. And just, I think it's a very beautiful example of how that entire chain, from the research to the procurement, the innovation, the regulation, and the investment can come together to really create something that is going to be long lasting and really have changes starting with the farmer and going all the way to the children. So
I always get excited when someone says hell yeah. It just means that something really good is going to happen. So really good example. I'm going to now quickly turn to the floor. I know if is Francesco here in the floor. You're right there. Perfect. I'm going to hand over to Francesco. He has a floor intervention and there's an interesting example to share. Over to you. If you don't mind introducing yourself, just your organization, and then your intervention, please.
Yeah, very honored. Thanks for this. Not just to I head the sustainable food system work at the European Center for Development Policy Management, ECDPM. And I wanted to just make sure I have a little space because we are conducting an interesting project together with NEPAD, which is the African Union Development Agency, on how you do investments that target simultaneously food security and climate action along African corridors. There's a lot of discussion on solidarity, but we know this is over. So African economic growth and investment is very much driven by infrastructure. So we wanted to make sure we anchor food and climate into where the money is already flowing. And I wanted to make sure this panel is aware about the fact that when we're scoping what to do, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We just want to support a lot of the capital available, public and private capital from Europe, with good ideas in Africa, and we're scoping where to invest. There is a famous Lobito corridor that's famous because there is mega announcements by the G7, including the US, and billions of money being pledged on a corridor that is basically originally thought about extractive industries, but we're trying to make sure it's about also food security and climate action. And when we scope what are the low-hanging fruits investment, regional beans value chain came up. So I wanted to make sure that we can partner up on this, but I also wanted to ask then a question to the panelists on the floor. I mean, clearly we don't need to be convinced about the sustainability angle, the food security angle. School meals is fantastic, but sometimes an investor asks the question, yeah, you know, I'm not sure beans is such a good idea, and investors still think a lot in mega bulk, maize, soya beans, these things. And then a government, to be honest, I'm an independent thinker, so I can say that, still thinks electoral cycles, so still thinks maize, you know, it means themselves. So what can you maybe say from the fantastic experience of the private sector, CGIAR, and even Rockefeller? What can we put on the table, even in African corridors, to make sure a big investor is convinced there is money to be made in selling at the regional level beans? And what can we convince the government to do beyond the off-taking, which is a fantastic idea? I buy totally school meals and we're going to put it on the floor. But what else can we do to say to the governments, look beyond the political crops and really invest in something so amazing, clearly like beans? So I just wanted to make sure, and happy to partner in the future. Thanks.
Fantastic question. What do you say to governments, or how do you make sure there is a market for beans? So a great question. Who wants to take the first step? Who's talking to governments more than anybody? Probably is the best person to take. Everybody's looking at Marcella. Looks like she.
No, I was thinking that, and as I said, it's not only advocating for beans, right? We are talking about pulses, right? That's first thing. The second thing, we have exactly the same conversation also in the CGIAR. That is we have to look beyond, some of the most dominant crops, especially if we are talking about climate resilience. So we know, for example, that with legumes and beans, we can be some of those can be more resilient to the new scenarios of climate change in many areas. So I think this is where, with science, we can provide the data to see how the suitability of some of those crops is going to change, and that space can be occupied by legumes that are more, for example, tolerant to drought, right, or to heat. So I think this is something we need to start putting now more on the table of those people that are taking those decisions, if we are seriously talking about climate resilience. And the other part is on school meals. I mean, I was looking at the numbers, and if you see right now, we see school meals in the public procurement space. We are talking about the potential to reach more than 4 million children in Africa. So that's why I was saying school meals is, to me, is really a lever of change, because you are, through that mechanism, reaching millions of children that are vulnerable in areas like in Africa. And we know that the world, and we have the data, has been made an equal progress on nutrition and poverty. So in general, if you see the numbers on nutrition in the world increased the production of calories, but is still behind in the quality of that nutrition, because it's much focused on calories, not much in other key components of nutrition. And also, those calories are not accessible still to many people, including children undernourished in Africa. So I think if we bring those numbers together, we can make the case on why we need to move also beyond the classic investments on cereals, for example. And I'm not saying it's not good to invest on cereals, but we need to see beyond that.
Go ahead. Floor is yours.
More numbers.
Yes. Please, numbers. Perfect. Investment theses investment theses are always built on numbers. Everything comes down to a P&L. So please.
We're very data driven at Rockefeller. So Just to complement what Marcela was saying, and I have here in my notes, is like we could feed 11 million more children with the same cost that we have right now. Let's just changing to regen like grown staples. Just making that change, we could feed 8 more million children in this scenario. Totally. Second one that is more related to health, but we are also in as a core program, is that sustainable school meals can lead to 200 billion in health in savings. That's a big number for anyone. It's like that's a big one. And the second one is 70 billion in climate related costs, what we call the climate hidden costs of all this work that we are doing. On top of that, there are some numbers that being a foundation that is people centered and people solution centered, that since I came on board and related to school meals are always like in my top priorities. One is that the return that you can get out of this. So $1 invested in school meals turns out in $9 of impact in the ecosystem, if it's private or but in the ecosystem. And when you serve 100,000 school meals, you're creating between 1,000 and 1,300 jobs related to that. So those are big numbers for investors, for MDBs, for governments. I also think that is very important to your point. How are we pitching this? The language that you are using. We have to get all of us to the same language, either if we are in the banking system, if we are in philanthropic organizations, if we're in the private sector, if we are in the scientific base. I think that's very important in order to mobilize more capital. It's something very basic, but it's the language that we're using.
I think you started this conversation by talking about mindset. And I think the mindset around this investment and the investment thesis around building resilience, as pulses have a big role to play as a rotational crop, a nitrogen fixing crop, on nutrition and diversity of crop also there's a huge role to play. And also from a community women empowerment perspective, it's a crop that is easily adopted and being able to do that. So across all three fields, I think there's an investment thesis to be made. But to some of what the panelists have said, I don't think we are screaming loud enough, and we're not talking the right language to change the mindset. But the investment thesis is there, and hopefully some of these organizations are working with organizations like yours to make that case. I want to see if there is any other question. Oh, perfect. I love questions.
Hi. What? Okay. So my name is Rawat Lili. I'm a Tunisian doctor. I work with a Tunisian nonprofit on integrating sustainable health and nutrition into education. So we work on school gardens as a tool or a way to educate about climate, health, and nutrition. But the idea first was to restore abandoned school kitchens. For that, we wanted to encourage children in those rural schools to eat more healthy, and pulses were part of the of the school garden project and the healthy meals that we were prepared. So it's a more grassroots, small scale perspective. We started small with 4 schools. Now we are going to 8 schools. But hearing all of you today, I'm inspired to scale up and see more solutions for those kinds of initiatives in Tunisia to be more impactful and more meaningful in the future. So I heard the evidence-based advocacy. I'm a researcher too, so I hear you. And we are also advocating for native wheat in Tunisia. So that's another step forward. I heard also about funding and how we can work together on the international level. And the private sector was not an idea that I had in mind, and now I can think about it and I can reach out to private sector. So thank you for sharing, and if you have any advice for me, I'm all ears.
I think you've made our day, because we often come to these COPs and we want to learn and hopefully inspire with or inspire. And you've given something for us to learn, but you've also said that you were inspired by this panelist. So I think we'll probably sleep well because we've done our job. There's one more question in the back, if you don't mind just handing. Introduce
thank you.
yourself. Thanks.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Luis Calzadilla, and I work for the New York Botanical Garden. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I work for the New York Botanical Garden, and I think I agree with most of what you have been saying. And because we have one of our scientific priorities is around food plants, I would like to ask you whether you see, as part of these initiatives, a role for botanical gardens who are working on food plants to work together on these initiatives.
Fantastic. So botanical gardens, food plants. I don't know. You are the captain of this
See,
panel.
no,
so
no, see,
you
but
know-
you were with me in another panel where we were with the New York Botanical Garden, and we were, and probably you too, we were together on that one. But no, what I wanted to share with that discussion is that we see that, to me, it's a natural linkage, but I don't know why it has not been done. I mean, the agricultural research centers, for example, we have the seed banks, right, where we have this mandate of conserving the agrobiodiversity in some crops. And then you have a similar mandate, right? It is to, first of all, acknowledge that diversity of plants and also preserve it and get that knowledge accessible to the public. And we were always saying why we have not been working together, because the New York Botanical Garden is working, for example, in food plants. There is a huge diversity there. We have also our crops, and we are talking about climate resilience, that we need to diversify the systems, etc. So why we are not putting the two things together and taking that knowledge into action? And there was an interesting question in that panel, and someone said, probably we also need people to feel that that diversity that is in the botanical gardens is for use. So I think it's how we work together. The same perception that our seed banks have. People say, "Oh no, those are like a fridge that have seeds stored there," and we're like, "No, no, no. It's not only a fridge. We also make efforts to put that into use, to bring the beans, the rice, the cassava. But I think we need to do the same if we work together with the botanical gardens. That work has, that has came a lot of many conversations this week here, and we need to make that connection if we really need to diversify the systems, to bring other options for the people in the Africa corridor or somewhere else.
I think people, I'll hand it to you. People often don't understand what biodiversity is, and botanical gardens sit at the heart of communities and people. And community gardens sit at the heart of people and communities. And so it's a living lab of an living ecosystem of what this looks like for all of the work to go. Over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on what you said, Francesco, right? So in terms of incentivizing the investment, you mentioned corn and soy as kind of the large commodity cash crops that are flowing around the world. I just wanted to make the point that pulses are also a cash crop, as well as having regenerative benefits, nutritional benefits. They're a cash crop. There's 100 million tons of pulses traded annually around the year, around the globe. And so it just makes me think, like, we've built these massive kind of industries, sectors around soy and corn, with millions of dollars of research and of investment, and so much research on how to make these crops more efficient, more cheaper, and fundamentally the main market for these two crops is animal feed, right? So it just struck me as a radical idea. If we were to position the growing of pulse crops worldwide, and we were to say the central market for this crop is to feed children in school meals, think about how investment and research would flow in. Think about how we would have byproducts. We would have innovation that we'd never seen before coming in because of this central tenet of this cash crop that is feeding children. And I think that would be the point that I want to make, is that when we talk about pulses, we talk about any kind of food, what we're really talking about is protein and fiber. And the market for protein and fiber is going to be the next big thing, is huge. And there's innovation spanning off of that, and people are demanding that. And so I think let's zoom out a little bit and think about, like, what does this look like on the global spectrum? Are we talking about a crop that is just there to regenerate soils? No, we're talking about a crop that can bring value back to farmers, back to businesses, back to governments, just as soy has, just as corn has. And to your point on oats, this massive industry that has spanned around oats, pulses can get there. We just need, we need a pre-competitive, we need a de-risking from governments, from private sector, from investors to bring us there. So
I think, yeah, I think that's the line we want to end on, is pulses as a cash crop for school meals. I think that's the best way to end. So thank you very much for wrapping this up. I'm afraid we're out of time. It flew. So thank you very much for spending the hour with us. Thank you all for spending the hour with us. There's lots of sessions going on, and the heat and humidity and everything else that goes in between. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you.